So it's almost time, literally days away now from the election, and it's fingers crossed as to what's going to happen. Obviously, we will bring you the full roundup of what's happened, some of the expert reports, and what they think's going to happen, what has happened. It'll all be fun, shall we say. So watch out for that one. And then, of course, business as usual. With a new parliament, what's going to happen to Brexit? So we'll be back to that. So here we are. So this is something we've all known for quite a while. The Tories want to get rid of the human rights bill completely, in every shape or form. This is one of the things that they, again, the ERG especially didn't like about being in the European Union, because it meant that they couldn't deport those other people that they don't like. You know, we all know the ones they talk about. So, this is the sinister threat to human rights buried in the Conservative manifesto. In fact, the Conservative manifesto is just a blank check. Why on earth you would give a party a blank check to essentially do whatever they want? Yeah. So this comes from Perspective magazine. I'll leave a link down below. So if Stefan Alkmaar, the professor of European law at the University of Oxford, quote, almost missed in the mention of the Human Rights Act in the latest Conservative manifesto, most people will have. That's probably the point. Buried on page 48 of the 2019 manifesto contains a single mention of the party's pledge to, quote, update the 1998 Human Rights Act, which brings the European Convention on Human Rights into domestic law. It doesn't specify what an update looks like, or whether it will happen beyond or after Brexit, which isn't much of a clue. The text is not in bold nor italic. The language is incredibly vague, and it is and it is indicating that the update will ensure that there is a proper balance between the rights of individuals and our vital national security and effective government. This is not a pledge intended to draw attention. The attempt at the innocuous marks a change. David Cameron's 2015 manifesto, which also promised the infamous in-out referendum, committed 5 times over 3 in bold, to scrap the human rights and introduce a British Bill of Rights. This pledge came despite the failure of the 2010 coalition's especially set up Bill of Rights Commission to agree on its content, and by the end of 2015 there was still no British Bill of Rights. In December of 2016 it was announced that the HRE repeal was delayed until after Brexit, and the 2017 Tory manifesto pledged to remain signed up to the European version for the duration of this parliament. During this time, prominent Conservatives politicised the Human Rights Act as Labour's, and this is odd given that it passed with an overwhelming cross-party support in 1998, which is more the European itself that was shaped by Winston Churchill and Conservative lawyer David Maxwell Fyfe. In the recent past, the Conservatives also wrote the legal sovereignty issue into the Brexit debate. Never mind the fact that leaving the EU does not entail leaving the European Human Rights Act either. Their statements were often inflammatory. The Cameron's pledge feeling physically sick at the thought of prisoners getting the right to vote, or simply false, like the pet cat Theresa May said prevented deportation. In reality, Judge Gleeson had found that the deportee was in a stable relationship and was therefore allowed to stay under the Human Rights Act, and the couple also kept a cat. There has been a populist misrepresentation of what the law is, said Helen Mountfield, the barrister and legal scholar and principal of Mansfield College, Oxford, and suggested that politicians and the populist press have part fueled the perception of that the Human Rights Act is a rogue's charter. Given the recent din they have made, it is notable that Conservatives' new promises to, quote, update the HRA is sheepishly tucked away in a paragraph that concerningly promises other sorts of constitutional review, including looking at the relationship between the government, parliament and the courts. The real question is, what does this mean? And that is worrying. Again, given the fact that the whole proroguing of parliament, could they try to remove judges from scrutinising parliament? Or if the government breaks the law, who holds the government to account? It should be the law. Again, this is another reason why the ERG and the other Eurosceptics are so desperate to leave the European Union. They don't like the fact that there are these laws and that there is a court which enforces those laws. So the word update is interesting, said Shayla Aintree, the associate professor in international human rights law at Oxford. They've really been relying on not being clear, so that later they can do what they want, and then we can say that the repeal is off the table. That is a good thing, and that we should hold them to that account. Should they dare cross that line? But given their past record, we cannot say what they mean to weaken the commitments, or that they have, or that what we have seen potentially could happen to the European version. Nadia O'Malley, the politics and campaigns officer at Liberty, an advocacy group, also warned that although, quote, an update might sound innocuous and even progressive given the Conservatives' history of trying to scrap the human rights agreement article, could lead to something far more sinister. While the manifesto pledge is scant on detail, recent Conservative announcements suggest that the proposal is likely to be aimed at when and where those rights can be enjoyed and who can be held to account on their violations, he said. Indeed, the other policy announcements there have been something insidious about what an update might entail, including a change that says that the Human Rights Act's protection do not apply retrospectively, so before 2000 when it came into force, and a revision to ensure its prohibitions did not apply to the actions of British forces overseas. Mountfield also posed the question of whether the update might try to limit the responsibility of sending people like illegal immigrants to places where they might have to fear for their rights being breached, something which, if it were to occur, would be even more of a concern. But whether the eventual shape of the HRA, the systematic attacks on it, are completely of the problem and troubling trend on Britain, the populist attempts to undermine a perceived legitimacy of the rule of law. It has become more acceptable to attack the judiciary, said Mountfield, recalling the Enemies of the People headline used by the Daily Mail, and the case on triggering Article 50 in 2017. So I don't think this is about human rights. I think it is about a battle for the mechanics of the accountability of governments into law. It is an attack on our institutions, and that's why it's worrying. It's a populist movement across the world, and this is our manifestation of it. They also go on to suggest that the reason for Britain is uniquely floating the withdrawal from the European one has historic roots. Other signatories to the European were losers in World War II, and at the moment and had a moment of crisis where they had to start from scratch. Alternatively, rebuilding their institutions to protect the dignity of the individual. In these countries, nobody complains about the European Human Rights Act curtailing the room for manoeuvre of the government. Britain, by contrast, has never had to rethink its fundamental arguments. It's what has been called is what has been called the price of victory, he explained. It's all part of the Brexit story. So there you have it. Very shady movings, but what can we expect? This is why on Thursday, please, for the love of God, vote them out of power.